I want to invite you to open your scriptures. We'll be in 1 Peter chapter 1, and we're going to kind of continue where we began a little bit last week on 1 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 13. And we're going to read this together off the screens, and then we'll walk through what this means for us today. The Apostle Peter wrote these words. He said, "Therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. Since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy." One of the things we want to walk through today is honestly not going to deal with, next Sunday I'm going to unpack verses 14, 15, and 16 together. Last week, we really, more than anything, we concentrated primarily on one word, the word therefore. If you weren't here last week, I really would encourage you to go back and watch that message online. It very much ties together. These four verses here, 13, 14, 15, and 16, they are a big swinging door, remembering the incredible wealth of resource that God has given us in Jesus Christ, verses 1 through 12. Verse 13 through 16 are this major hinge that opens the door to, okay, but I'm still here. My kids are still this way. My in-laws are still this. My friends are still this. My job feels like this. What do I do in this space of this life right now? My friends are making these decisions and I can't stop them. My own grown children are doing these things and I can't control them. I myself still battle these things. What do I do here? Do I just gather on Sundays and give a little bit and maybe volunteer in the kids area for a little while until everybody realizes I'm obviously not called to that, and then I do something else for a little while, maybe try to play in the band until they plug my instrument in, and then I got to quit, and all of these things. Right? I feel like I'm getting my testimony. You're welcome. But in this space, what I want us to identify this morning, and each week while we unpack this letter of 1 Peter, you need to stop. If it's only on Sunday mornings, you need to stop. Whatever your Christian journey or church journey or experiences and religious thing, whatever it is, you need to pause for a moment and acknowledge this thing. And I want you to acknowledge this back to me as best you can. So if that means you got to lie, then so be it. Life is hard. It's not the only truth about life. Life is amazing. This place is incredible. It's absolutely mind-blowing to feel the wind. It is, for any of you who have ever gone to the beach and stood at the ocean's edge, it is unbelievable what that moment will do to you. It will make you feel all kinds of amazing, and like there's this, it also make you feel very small. And yet, life is also hard. Is it okay to say that? So what's our problem as followers of Jesus, learning about Jesus, or even people exploring the things of Christianity and faith and being a church and so on? One of the things we have to taste a little bit in order to let the whole work do its work is acknowledge that in this letter, especially, what Peter is doing is he's helping exiles. And I think the thing that you and I need to understand is as we talk with each other, and listen, this is what I fear the most for some of you. Social media and the news and really all forms of public information and communication out there, you've learned what clickbait and hot takes are because they're real. And they create within every single one of us an incredible level of emotion that I don't think as followers of Jesus we necessarily are called to have with each other. When I read through my New Testament, I see a group of people who, though belabored with hot takes and clickbait, are very patient with one another. Now maybe they're young in their faith and so they get corrected because they're not very patient, but they're invited to trust Jesus and they become, over time, they become patient. Or maybe they become more grace-filled, which means, yes, there are things in your life that need to be corrected, and they are not okay to keep. At the same time, you are under so much weight that I can talk to you about that later. Right now, for this moment, if we're going to follow Jesus together, I need you to know that no matter what befalls you, I love you. You may choose to walk away, you may do these things, but I, in this space, with you in this moment, I see these things, and I know you know I see these things, but you know what? I'm not going to go after that right now, because more important than anything, you need to know that whether you change those things or not, those things don't determine that I love you. Now, that behavior isn't natural, because every human relationship says, I will love you as long as, and then fill in the blank. That's our normal operating principle as a human being, a sinner. I will fulfill my part of the bargain as long as you fulfill yours. I'll meet my expectations when you meet yours, or we'll agree how that's going to play out, but when you fail on your end, I'm going to withhold here. And Jesus is like, I'm going to go all the way. I'm going to love you, and you choose for yourself what to do this day. Joshua spoke of this. Many others throughout the Old Testament, honoring God, learned how to say these words. This is what I'm going to do. As for you, I love you, but as for you, you must choose. I'm not going to go with you down your road and pretend that it's a road that you should go down, but I will never not be available for you to turn to, no matter how far down that road you go. Well, where does that come from? Well, that's what he did for me. That's what he did for me. And the scriptures say that when one sinner repents and turns their life to Jesus, heaven erupts. The angels go crazy, as it were, celebrating the incredible measure of the moment when somebody finally sees Jesus for who he really is and what he offers and what God the Father has done and what now the Holy Spirit starts to build within us. Those things help us. Here's why. Life is hard. There are experiences in our day-to-day life that completely wear us down. They do. As followers of Jesus, we recognize that our physical bodies, our dietary restrictions or the lack thereof, our longings and cravings in this life, they still have an effect on us. And we interact with each other according to our successes and failures in those spaces. Everybody see that? You know when your friend or your coworker or your kids or your parents or your spouse, you know when they're having a day with the Lord and a day that ain't with him. And you yourselves know when it's your story as well. Days when you're winning and days when you're not. What's the problem? It's hard to be in exile. Whether we're chosen for this, it's still hard. And so here's the thing, if that's all you've got, if all you get today out of a sermon is, well, the pastor said that life is hard, that doesn't go very far, does it? Wow, boy, he spoke the truth. Yeah, all right. I don't know if it was helpful. Life is hard. So how do you get through the hard things? And at the most basic of levels with 1 Peter, this is what this letter is for us for. It's about dealing with something that we all think about, and that is that it is, in fact, hard at times in our experiences. It is hard to follow Jesus and live in this space we're called to live in. The life of following Jesus and participating in the things of this world. Like, should I go to this movie? Should I not go to this movie? Like, isn't it a bummer that we have to think that way? It's like, well, yes and no. Well, okay, so so-and-so wants to invite me out to go out to dinner with them, but they're wanting to go to this place and this place, and I'm not sure from a conscience standpoint. You guys know what I'm talking about. Like, all of this stuff kind of starts to stir through our lives of like, man, can I do this? Should I do that? How do I make these decisions? These used to not be here. It used to be, do I wanna or not? Now there's this new word, ought to. And all of a sudden, how do we live that out? Well, it's out, in, and in, out that we function in these spaces. You see, we're still taking in the experiences of this world, and we're also responding. We're taking our inner life and we're trying to set it out in the spaces in front of us. And we're also trying to figure out how to honor God with these particular relationships or places that we go. And we're trying to figure this stuff out. And then we're trying to decide, should we or shouldn't we? And is it that big of a deal? How many of you guys have said to yourselves in recent weeks, it's not that big of a deal, right? And we give ourselves a lot of permission. Now, it's also true that we would never do that with the other people in our life. We would give them no, you should do this. But as for me, I might give in because, I'm working on me, right? But you should have your stuff together. That's how we interact, and that's how we feel in our hearts. So I want to pause here for just a split second. Because the positional change from once being a child of God's wrath, which all of us at one time were, and maybe some of us in this space still are, the position change from being a child of wrath to becoming a child of His, while still living here, has consequences. It does. We can lose friends, which Jesus said would happen. We can even be left out of family gatherings, which Jesus said would happen. We can even have our own kids leave us, which Jesus said would happen. We could have our own parents, our own spouses not follow us down this journey. Jesus said this would happen. And yet, we also have to acknowledge that if it happens, it hurts a lot. Not only does it hurt a lot, but how do we live well? How do we follow Jesus into and through and beyond those experiences which are so costly sometimes? Being in and of the world is our old story. Becoming a child of God is now living here with that new reality growing within, which is that the experiences and the change, though they can feel quite difficult, God wants His people to know and put into practice how to thrive, not just barely survive. I need you to know this morning that what we're going to concentrate on at the conclusion of this message, you are either going to hear at 25%, 5%, 95%. You have to do that work on your end. You have to decide, am I willing to take in all that this says, no matter what it is saying to me? Am I willing to? Because at the core of all of this, any Bible teacher or person, any pastor, whether you like them or whether they dress the way you like, or they do or don't do these things, or they stand still or they move, whatever the things are, when God's word is in front of you, the decision will be, how will you respond, not how effective can I deliver it for you to be tricked into buying it. So this morning, I want you to be encouraged, but to get there, you're going to have to see some things. So I want you to imagine, now because of the lights and because I love you so much, I'm not going to do this. I've done it before, and it didn't go well, so I'm not going to do it. But I have these mirrors in my office, and for some of you who've been around for a while, you know that at one time I showed those mirrors, and some of you are still getting your eyes worked on because of that morning. But if I were to hold up a mirror this morning to every single one of you, that's what these scriptures are, and this conversation is going to do today, okay? So are you ready to see you? Just lie to me and say yes. There we go. Good job. Good job. Good job. Here we go. We need hope. That's the key phrase in this text. We need hope to cope. And what we hope or hope in needs to actually be trustworthy. You guys got that? You can't just hope and say, and this is the problem with the English word hope, all right? In the Hebrew and in the Greek, the two languages where this word occurs most commonly in the scriptures, the word doesn't mean how we use it. Like if we're like, hey, are you going to go to the mall today? Are you going to go shopping? Yeah, I just hope I get a good parking space. That's not really even remotely close to the idea of hope. That's actually, I doubt that I will, but maybe I get to. That's not hope. All right? Hope is actually something completely different. We misuse the word in English, and it's very difficult to translate this in a way that makes sense to you. Because the word hope, when we read set your hope fully on the grace, it's like, does that mean just wish longingly but have no real confidence that it may or may not work out? That is not at all what the word hope has for anybody. But it is how we use it in our conversations with people. I hope I get to retire early, or I hope I get to retire at all, or I hope no. Hope is this confident, it hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen, and I'm hoping in that. I'm living today in light of that. Well, why aren't you doing this? Oh, because I hope in that. I'm not hoping in the outcome of these things, I'm hoping in that. So I'm kind of taking my anchor, and I'm taking the anchor and I'm putting it over here. That's hope. Has everybody got me? Because you're going to need that as we start to go through some of these questions here in a second. That mirror moment is about to happen. You see, when we get into this text, he says, therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, which we unpacked last week, set your hope fully on the grace. And this word hope jumps off the page because I highlighted it and underlined it for you. But when you read it, it should also highlight and jump off the page at you. And here's why. The Bible is constant. It wants you to hope in God. What we attach our hope to guides more of our response to our experiences than we realize. The Hebrew word for hope, in the Hebrew scriptures, the word for hope is actually, it comes from the word for a strong rope that you would use to secure something. Like if you were going to tie a boat so that the boat never moves, that same word is the word that we have for hope. If you were going to tie something down knowing that it can't go anywhere because of the strong rope, that's the word hope. Ever got that? Okay, because you're going to need the rope narrative as you think through some of these things this morning, because you've tied your life to stuff that is not able to hold at all. And yet you are constantly retying that rope, and you're constantly anxious about turning your shoulder to see if the rope is still holding, because you know the ropes that you've tied to things don't hold. So, one of the phrases I want to lay out here this morning is this. I want to start bothering you at this point in the message. We always obey what we desire most. Not sometimes, not occasionally, not accidentally. We always obey what we desire most. When we desire something more than we desire God, we will obey that something every single time we are faced with a choice to obey God or to obey it. And I'm going to prove it to you. It has to do with the rest of the equations that we work with. Hope is not separate from our problem. Our problem as exiles is that we hope in things we ought not, or we divide our hope a bunch of other things. Well, the next word in our text is just as helpful, and it's the word fully. And it's in there for a reason. Hoping fully is what we are missing. A lot of us, we can kind of feel the experiences of hope or even do some hopeful type things, but we also put our hope and tie our ropes to a bunch of other stuff. But this is a phrase that prevents us from living healthy Christian lives. It's because we're not concentrating and meditating on the hope that we have in fact been given. We're concentrating and meditating on other things. We choose to hope in dead things, shallow things that cannot fulfill or hold what we search for in this life. It just doesn't work. And I want to give you an example of this. This is in Jeremiah. This is in the Old Testament. God is speaking through Jeremiah to his people, and it's this moment of heartache, because what's preceding this text in Jeremiah 2, and I would really encourage you to go read it, is God is looking at his people and he's like, when we started this journey in the wilderness, when I rescued you out of slavery in Egypt, you were like a bride to me. You followed me everywhere. I provided everything for you. Our relationship was going so well. And then he turns on them and he goes, what fault did your fathers find in me? The people who led you to where you're at now, what is it you think they think I did wrong that they turned from me and started doing other things, chasing other things, making other things more important, when from day one I provided and promised and fulfilled? What happened to our relationship where I created you, made you, rescued you, loved you, and then you go, yeah, but I like these shiny things over here, even though they don't do for other kids are playing with this toy in the sandbox, and so even though this one's really nice and you love me and blah, blah, I'm going to go play with that one. And God says, for my people have committed two evils. The first, they have forsaken me. They broke off the engagement. They broke up the marriage. And not only that, they married themselves. They hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. And what he follows with, he goes, I am the God who provides living water, permanent water, constant, sustaining. And yet they went and dug their own stupid holes with cracks in it, and they're constantly filling up. Broken cisterns do this. You put water in them, they leak. And for some of you, your experiences in your life have been coming to church or coming to religious experiences or events, and you've kind of put all of your eggs in the basket, so to speak. But then you go out there into the world, and what ends up happening is you realize that you are putting your hope in your feelings instead of the God. You are putting your hope in the preferences and experiences instead of the God. Does that make sense? And I'm going to show you. David Powlison is an author, former pastor, biblical counselor, and he wrote these words. He wrote an essay, and in the essay was titled, Idols of the Heart and Vanity Fair. So if you want to go look that up, you can. In it, he asks a series of questions. This has to do with what you set your hope fully on. Because one of the things that you and I need is to have diagnostic questions to show us our broken cisterns. Do you want to see your broken cisterns? The things you actually lean on more than you realize that affect how you operate in exile as a Christian. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Are you ready for this? I want you to answer these in the spaces you're sitting right now. So I'm going to ask these questions to you. What do I feel I cannot survive or function without? What do I feel I must have in order to enjoy my life or to be acceptable to a specific person in my life? What are the things I'm terrified of losing or obsessed about having? I want you to think about it for a second. What are the things you're most terrified of losing? And I want you to go through this for a second because you're probably not going to go through this very far, so I'm going to make you. For those of you that are married, how much does the acceptance of your spouse mean to you? Remember, I said earlier, we obey what we desire most. If God were to call you to something, and your spouse is in total disagreement, how do you work that out? Emotionally, spiritually. What if it's something simple? What if it's a friendship? I'm asking sincerely. I want you to think about this. Just be honest with your heart for a moment. I know most of you that have been in church for a long time, you're going to give me those, Drew, yeah, I've already learned those things. Maybe. The more I read, the more I'm convinced we're all going to continually be learning these things. And so the best response we can hope for is, I saw the last one God showed me, and I'm learning how to let it die. Versus, no, I've already done all that. I don't know. Maybe, but also maybe not. And so what is it that you treasure a whole lot? Let me ask you another question. This will kind of shift it off center maybe a little bit. Where do I spend my time and money with the least amount of effort? What are the things in my life that I don't even question, I just do them? Time, like what are the things that exist within your life that you don't even really have to categorically think about? You just naturally do them, either your time or your money, for example. Those are two of your most prominent resources, I would assume. So what are the ones in your life that you don't even think about? Because I'm going to tell you right now, those might be things in your life that are broken cisterns that you just trust in. You can't even hear God's voice talk to you about your money or the way you spend your time. You don't even think he would talk to you about it doesn't even land for you. Because you've conditioned your life that if God's going to speak to you, it's going to be about specific things, maybe big picture things. but he has no real concern about your time or your money. And I would say, as long as you stay out of the New Testament, you've got lots of data to support that. But if you open up the New Testament, game on. Because the person of Jesus says most of the things that you celebrate as good, you actually cherish as holy, and you make serve you, and you let them strangle you in different ways, instead of living your life with the freedom and the grace that Jesus has bought you. I'll ask you a little bit more clarifying on this. What are the most unquestioned yeses in the way you spend your money? Do you guys have some subscriptions? Maybe even some medicines, or maybe even some dietary things that you don't even question? You know, for me, everybody knows this, right? If you go to the grocery store hungry, what happens? The reason this room just had all kinds of commotion, because everybody that's got a wallet and been in a grocery store or a convenience store knows you walk out with more than you wrote down for, right? Why? Because the desires are leading you. In the moment, like the best thing you could do is eat a non-satisfactory but fulfilling meal at home that tasted meh, but filled you up, and then go to the grocery store. Because that bag of Flamin' Hot Cheetos or Funyuns, I'm talking for other people, not me. That bag of those things, it ain't so pretty anymore, right? It's like, meh, I had a bologna sandwich at home. That's nothing, right? But you start to recognize that your desires. So the question is, what are the most unquestioned yeses? The things that you're entitled to do with your money. What are they? And how do you identify them? The things we give time and money to most effortlessly are absolutely the things that we worship and serve. So here's how this works. When you have things in your life that you don't question, you buy them whenever you want them, they aren't actually the God in the moment. They're not what you're worshiping. You're worshiping yourself. Nobody tells you no. Nobody tells you when to wait. You're the king of the universe. You decide what you want, when you want, how you want it, and anybody that has an opinion isn't worth trusting to have it. That's how you operate. I'm not saying you would ever dialogically have that conversation in your head. Some of you might, but that's not the point. The point is how you operate is there are certain things in your life nobody can tell you that is wrong. Nobody. And you are not only okay with that, you've compartmentalized your prayer life, your walk with Jesus to say, God, you can talk to me about these things. Obviously, they're important. The news says it is, but this area of my life, this isn't a big deal. And what God is saying is like, I couldn't care less about what you're seeing on TV. This is all I'm after right now. This is the corner of your heart that you say, I will, versus saying, God, your will. Let me ask another question, as if I haven't already caused you to consider not coming back next week. What do I think and talk about the most? You know, this is a trick, because I'm paid to talk for this, right? So you might think that I'm holier than you on this, but I might not be. What do you think and talk about the most? Let me ask you this. What do you daydream about a lot? Just picture it right now. I said a statement just a few minutes ago. You guys, we always obey what we desire most. You might use church gatherings as a means of dealing with your introversion or extroversion. You might use it as the means of fulfilling some sort of personal, I go to church, therefore statement in your daily life. Versus I am called to this particular group of people to obey what God is doing in this space, to be conformed into the image of Jesus, because the more of Jesus in this world, according to God's leading, is going to change this place for the glory that it is called to become. And God is absolutely able, as I humble myself and lay my life at his feet. Is that why you're here? What do you think about the most and talk about the most? Is it sports? Because that may not be at sports at all. It's just you refuse to talk about serious things. You refuse to talk about personal things, things at home, things in your past, things in your present, or things you're scared of in your future. You don't touch those. You become incredibly uncomfortable around those conversations and you change the subject quickly. Your body language shuts down because you're nervous and you're scared. Why? Because that's an idol that you dare not touch. What do you set your hope fully in? Do you set your hope fully in, I want a little bit of God and a little bit of these other things, and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then if everybody could just leave me alone, then this is how life should go. Versus a God, whatever you say. We're going to move. Okay, we're going to move. God, we're going to do this with our money. Yeah, but things are already tight. And okay, so we're going to say, okay, God, whatever you're leading us to, teach us to want these things. I don't want to hold on to anything that you've given me with white knuckles, but I want to use it joyfully as the equipment you've given me in my life to bless and change the lives of those around me. Because I have already been given everything I need. Therefore, everything I have now belongs to the work you're calling me to in my neighborhood, in my home, in my job, and maybe as a part of my church family. It's the only reason I'm still breathing is how can I move you closer to Jesus? If you have that mindset, setting your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ, setting your hope fully there, not partially there and partially here, or partially in my marriage, or partially in my reputation, or partially in my job, or whatever. Whether or not people think I'm a good parent. I have 5 kids. I gave up on that a long time ago. Let me ask you another question. Where do my thoughts go most quickly and most instinctively when I'm alone in the car, when I wake up, or when I'm alone in quiet, undistracted places? Where does your mind drift? Luke 5:16, there's this really interesting phrase. It says Jesus was around a large crowd of people and he'd been healing and a whole bunch of stuff had happened. And then kind of the crowd broke and the day shifted. And it says, Luke 5:16 says, and the Lord Jesus slipped away. It says he withdrew to a desolate place to pray. And in the Greek, the best rendering of that word is to slip away. It's like whenever life doesn't demand something from you in the moment, what do you drift away to? Sudoku? Or is it communion with God? Like in a very honest, like, Father, man, that moment exhausted me. Could I have a week before I see them again? Or like what do you drift away to when nothing in the world is capturing your attention in the moment? Jesus wants to be what you slip away to because he has the very greatest good waiting for you, even if it feels uncomfortable. Let me ask you another question. So William Temple had this Archbishop William Temple once said, your religion is your solitude. So when you're totally alone, what are you thinking about? Which biblical commands am I most reluctant to obey? What do I treasure so much that if it is threatened, I will actually disobey God to keep it? Like if God told you to leave your job that pays really well, but morally it's bankrupting you, would you change it? Like if you had a major concern for the condition of the world and yet your primary job was to work for an agency that built triggers for nuclear bombs, would you, with your conscience, say, oh, it's just a paycheck? Or could you possibly hear, if God were to say to you, I want, according to the convictions I've placed in you, I want you to consider leaving this job, even though it might mean 20% of your income will never come back to you? What part of your life are you completely unable to hear God talk to you about at all? Can you even hear those things? This is what we're talking about, setting your hope fully. Being sober, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded means absolutely non-negotiable. Christian, whether you're an infant or a giant in the faith, absolutely God wants you to think honestly, to think soberly. You don't need to be, sobriety is not beating yourself up or giving yourself a pass. It's just being honest. Yeah, I do that. What's next is the repentant opportunity that Jesus calls you to, but can you be honest with yourself? And I'm going to be honest with you right now. I've sat in a lot of conversations. I don't think most people are actually very honest. Because I think most people are absolutely convinced that this life is so daggone hard as it is, the last thing I want is to make it harder. I'm like, well, and I think you're believing a lie. Because just because these changes need to happen in your life doesn't mean that those changes are conditional to me loving you. See, the body of Christ has done a pretty poor job, I think, in one aspect. Is like, I'm going to ask you to change this area of your life. Now, I'm going to withhold friendship until you get your act together. It's like, no, I'm going to labor with you. I'm going to jump into this with you. I'm going to be with you for the ups and the downs. And this is what happened to me so many years ago that completely changed my view of God altogether. When I had a guy show up on my doorstep and he said very plainly, do you want to change your life? Now, I had a lot of options to answer that. I could have said no. I could have lied and said yes and then done nothing about it, or I could have said yes and gone through with it. And after smoking a whole bunch of the cigarettes I found in the ashtray and having a couple of beers at age 19, I said yes, and I went to his office. But here's what happened. He said, look, I want to invite you to consider changing your life, but if you decide not to, nothing changes between us. I love you no matter what you decide. And I'd never heard a Christian tell me that before. I'd heard lots of Christians tell me, you need to change this about your life, but if you're unwilling to change it, then the Bible says to dust off my feet and I'm out of here. And never mind the fact that the only time I'm in your life is if I can correct you. And if I can correct you and point out your shortcomings and then run back and say, hey, we're over here. Oh, you're not living well? Well, you need to do this. And then run back. If that's what our Christian friendships look like, we're not reading our Bible to learn from our Lord on how to do this. We have to fight for each other. And that means we have to be honest about our own weaknesses with each other, long in prayer for the God who will come through and believe that he does. And set our hope fully on him, not my ability to be slightly better than you. That's not why we're alive. We are to be the most humble, the most careful, the most quiet-souled beings on this planet right now. Tempered by the precious patience of Jesus Christ. Not in any way permitting sin in our own lives or in the lives of those around us, but never being the mean hammers that make those sins look like they're gone. We are called to obey Jesus, everything he says. And that will always look a certain way. So the first thing we have to do is start saying the things that are true about ourselves. I am guilty of these things. It's true. Will you help me? And then when you say yes, you say yes. Yeah, but what about attendance and what about blah, blah? Who cares? The calling is that we are being conformed into the image of Jesus. Not getting a whole bunch of people to hear me talk, as awesome as that clearly is for you. No, the hope would that be the audience that you have with the people in your life who trust you, that the words of God today will go into you in such a way that they behave through you and it blesses those lives. And whether they attend here or not is not important. But whether or not you are equipped to attend to them is everything. This is why we gather. We practice being sober-minded, thinking honestly about the truth of God's love, his mercy, his grace, and his hatred towards sin. It's all true. So when we gather, we are here to remind each other, to put to death the old life and to raise up the Christ who is screaming from the inside, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, bless the poor. So let me ask you that question. What do you treasure so much that if it is threatened, you will disobey God to keep it? What is so essential to me that I will disobey God to get it? What things anger me the most? What kinds of people, things, or circumstances irritate me the most? And what about these people, things, or circumstances give them this kind of power over me? What if it happened would strongly tempt me to curse God or push him out of my life? What is something like, maybe, I'll never forget, this is a funny example. Sonny, if by any weird chance you're watching, so Hillary, I love you, this isn't about, but I had a girl in 3rd grade. I really liked her a lot, all right? I did. Her name was Sunny. I really liked her a lot. So I went outside on my farm, and I was outside, and this was summer, right? And we had the 7-digit phone world. You remember before, like, now, really early, it was just 4 digits. We were that far out in the woods. But we had come into the new world, and we had 7 digits, and I called Miriam. You know why I called Miriam? Because Miriam was Sonny's best friend. And I called Miriam. I said, Miriam, I really like her a lot. I'd like for her to go with me. Would you ask her for me? Because that's what men do. So I asked her, and she said no. So I did what any self-respecting, God-honoring person would do. I called her right back. And I asked again. I did that maybe 150, I don't know, a lot of times that day. But then I gave up on the whole phone thing. Clearly there's, maybe it's my tone or whatever. So I went out and I looked up, and I'll never forget. I walked up to the north side of our house, and there's this little clearing thing, and it was a beautiful, beautiful blue day, puffy, puffy white clouds, and I just cried out to God, God, would you make Sonny go with me? Please. Then, as only God would do, I called her back. And I called her back, and do you know what Miriam said? Yes. After the 20-some-odd god-awful phone conversations of begging and me praying, God made her like me for 23 hours. Because less than one day later, Miriam calls back. Now, I didn't go to see Sonny. We didn't go on any dates. Third grade, there's hindrances. But either way, so middle of the summer, literally didn't even talk. Just, I whittled her down to a meager yes at the end of the day. And then 23 hours later, after enough patience clearly on her end, she called back to say, hey, she breaks up. To which I did what? I ran right back outside and, God, what are we doing? This isn't working. I prayed, you answered, and then you take it away? And you should immediately hear Job's voice in the Old Testament. Now here's the challenge. Some of you are Job's wife. If God doesn't do what you want him to do, curse him and get out of this. If he's not working for you, why do you have him in your life altogether? Curse him. Move on. If God isn't here to do what you need him to do, to have the life you know you deserve to have, then why on earth would you follow this God? This doesn't make any sense. Everybody with me? These are the questions that are at the heart level. So, how will you fill in this blank? Everybody still listening? I cannot, and I probably will not be happy unless. What is it for you? Is it a better diagnosis? Is it a kid turning their life around? A job situation? Is it somebody from your past getting caught? I will not be happy unless. What is it for you? Some of you have probably, perhaps, lived long enough to have maybe given up on being happy altogether. You've just resolved that this is what life is, and I just need to grin and bear it and just kind of trudge my way through here. Joy really isn't something, that's for the naive Christians that don't really know, or the people who have enough money to anesthetize themselves from challenge. But as for me, this is my calling, this is my lot. I'm just going to hold my chin up as best I can and barely hang on, and then maybe God will let me die in my sleep one day and this will all be over. Some of you are living that way, and that's not what God has for you. That's not at all. It does not mean in any way that the challenges you face aren't real and difficult. They are. But setting your hope fully on the grace has within itself an incredible resource that you can have and need. Jesus, in Luke chapter 4, the devil confronts him 3 different times with temptations. And each time, Jesus responds in moments of temptation with God's truth right back to the devil. Each time, he rebukes Satan with God's own word. For those of you that can hear the train, it shows up. It does that. In Luke 4, Jesus is tempted by the devil in these 3 different times, and yet he knew that his feelings and his momentary longings were only going to be met fully by trusting the provision of his Father in heaven. Do you know this as your true hope? Therefore, this text comes to life for us in this space. Therefore, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you. The grace that will be brought to you is where I want to have the kids make their way back in. The grace that will be brought to you, that is coming at the end, this grace is when evil dies. Everybody look at me. Evil is going to die. The hardship ends. Wickedness is going to be over. Jesus lived it, and he's given you that life. Jesus did not bring an ounce of failure into this world. Dying on the cross at the hands of sinners, he didn't fail. And that is your life that you get to embrace, learn from, treasure, and hope in. You probably learn more from other spaces than his voice, but he's calling you right now, this morning. Whose voice do you want to live for the most? There are things in your life that may need to change. He has what is needed. You don't need a better accountability group. You need a group of brothers and sisters who love you, who will journey with you in these changes. They will cry with you when the difficulties are overwhelming, and they will champion and celebrate with you when the joys come in the morning, and they will. Set your hope fully on the grace, the unmerited favor that will be brought to you. We don't have to hope in finding it here and now, but trust that God is bringing it, which means we can live that way here as a foretaste of what is to come, and also a glimpse for those around us of what they might miss if they don't know Jesus. In the opening paragraph of C.S. Lewis's chapter in his book, Mere Christianity, he gave these talks during World War II, and they were later put together in the book called Mere Christianity. And in these radio talks on the BBC, he would give these different talks. Well, one is on the word hope. It's near the end of the book, and he wrote this: if you read history, you will find that the Christians who did most for the present world were those who thought most of the next. C.S. Lewis said this: if you read history, if you pay attention to history, you will find that the Christians who did most for the present world were the ones who thought most of the next. Loving, forgiving, giving, sacrificing, resting, not worrying, not fearing, rejoicing, and hoping. Is this what you would put on your t-shirt to identify what kind of person you are? That's why we see Jesus in his model prayer with his disciples. He taught them to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth, at church at Maine, in my home, as it is in heaven. Is this how you think? And this is where we set, if I set my hope there, then I can live here, enduring hardship, sitting with difficult people, becoming a difficult person myself, which can happen. But I love you. Do you love each other? Do we want to love each other? Yeah, but Drew, have you met some of these people? I have. Honestly, I'm one of them if you get to know me long enough. I'm not Jesus. I'm just trying to learn from him how to be less of the me I was yesterday. Is this what you wake up to do tomorrow, the next day, the next day? The last phrase here. At the revelation of Jesus Christ. What is going to happen at this event? J.R. Tolkien wrote in his story, The Fellowship of the Ring, at the end of all of this, what we get to acknowledge and realize is this: all, not some, all the sad things come untrue. Some of you have lost a loved one years ago, and you're still not okay. Listen to me. He will wipe away every tear. And when you cry, you know they're the tears that well up in the eye but don't actually hit the cheek. You know what I'm talking about? Guys, you're the ones. Look, it's allergies, right? Right? I need you to hear this. At the revelation of Jesus Christ, where all of this is headed, your Christian journey, your Bible study, your learning, your obedience practices, your discovery of how God is training you, where it ends, he will wipe away every tear. Not just the ones that are clearly visible on the outside, but avoiding the ones that are a little closer to the eye. He's going to wipe away every sad thought. Isn't that what you're hopeful for most anyway? Don't you wish the most difficult things that you faced in your life can somehow be made good somehow? That good can come out of the difficult things you have found in this life? Most of you have resolved that just isn't real. It's not possible. Jesus rising from the dead says you're wrong. It isn't only possible, it's guaranteed by faith alone in that. It's a done deal. It's sealed. Remember, it said, kept in heaven for you, undefiled, imperishable. Your inheritance is done, so you don't have to keep wondering. You just need to trust God. So, church at Maine, do you trust God? Then you're going to need to put that into practice by preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded. Set your hope fully, not in what people think of you, not in how much money you can accrue before retirement, not in whether or not other people think you're this or that, but set your hope, your idols of the heart, fully on the grace that will be brought to you. Not could be, or if you do hard enough work, it'll earned. It's coming. God is coming. He is bringing everything you are longing for most, and that is not something you need to put on the shelf in your living room. That is something you put in every pocket, everywhere you go. It is the one thing when you most need it, it's right there. This is how the Christian life works. So as we prepare to remember how this happened, I'm going to ask you a very simple question from Galatians. Galatians chapter 2. Therefore, nope, that's not it. Whoops. Paul says, I have been crucified. Now here's what's interesting. He wasn't dead. He was, he had some friends, and he was actually alive and writing these words. So is he lying? What's he trying to teach here? I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by what? Say it out loud. Faith. I live by faith in the Son of God. Who what? Say that for real. Who what? He loved you. Instead of looking on you with the condemnation that you and I both know we both deserve, that went to Jesus instead. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. How do we live an exile life? Let go of the things that we're holding on to here to make us feel fulfilled, satisfied. Set your hope fully on the grace. What is God promising to you? Read through the Gospels and look at all of the promises. Read the Gospel of John this week and look at all the things that Jesus says are coming strictly to those who just believe. Not who win the attendance awards or who volunteer the most. Those are all good things. They're not bad, but they have no merit in God's grace. God's grace is freely given to you because he loved you and he gave himself for you. Mike, he gave himself for you, and he was glad to do it. Mary Ellen, he was happy. The scriptures, Hebrews 12 says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame. Jesus looks at you and he says, you're worth it. You were always worth it. So are the people out there who still hate me. They're worth it. Now go, love them, care for them, forgive them, be merciful to them, just as I was merciful to you. What are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do the rest of the day? We have hope. I was listening to a podcast. I'm going to close with this, I promise. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week, and it was an interview between two Christian leaders. And one of the leaders was a pastor who has done a lot of adoption, has, I think, 2 biological kids maybe, and I think 2 or 3 children through adoption. And those roads have been pretty tough. They've done that while also in ministry and some other things. So he was just acknowledging in the moment, he and his wife were talking at one point in time, and she said something very, very interesting. She said, it seems that every door to minister to people and every door to follow Jesus, it seems like every door somehow is marked with the words broken and hurting, enter here. It just feels that way. Like somehow if you're going to go on the journey of following Jesus, somewhere you're going to experience other people and maybe even things in your own life that feel like broken and hurting. Anybody? At the end of the interview, the host mentioned this. He said, what every follower of Jesus eventually learns by following Jesus is that all the doors are in fact marked broken and hurting. But the way of the cross leads home. Our hope is not for here, but to live as though the home that is coming to us is in our hearts already. We're going to gather at the tables in the front and the back to grab a cup of the juice and a piece of the bread and return to our seats. And I want you to, as we're doing this, I want you to ask this one question, and I'll ask it again as you guys make your way to your seats. What do I really feel I cannot survive or function without most? While you're holding the bread and the cup, I want you to ask yourself this question. I want you to talk to your Father in heaven.